should be played at high volume. This should be played at high volume. This should be played at high volume. Preferably in a residential area.
The following thoughts on Hoppe Hour do not represent Cox Media Group or its sponsoring. Anything you hear may and will be used against you. Thank you. Voted as best local podcast in Tampa Bay by the Creative Loafing. You're listening to Hoppe Hour.
What's up? This is Hoppe Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppe, and I'm very honored about this next guest. This guy is a pioneer and a legend in this business known as radio. On the phone line is Chicago radio legend Art Hellyer. He is on Hoppe Hour. How's it going, Art?
Going right along, Ryan. Thank you. I've always wanted to ask you a question.
What's up, Art?
Somewhere in the background, years ago, are you related to Willie Hoppe, the great billiards player?
No, here's the weird thing about my last name, Hoppe. I will say probably 5 times a year, I'll have someone come up to me and say, are you related to this Hoppe or that Hoppe? I have no relation to him, but it's really weird. I would say once a month when I meet someone and I say my name, I guess it's a very common name, Art, because a lot of people will go, are you related to this Hoppe or that one? It's very weird, you know?
Yeah, it surely is. But Willie Hoppe was a great billiard star back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. And I've often wondered that to ask you about that. So we've got that settled, and for all of your listeners wondering about it.
Now, I was watching your video on YouTube, your documentary that was on PBS, and it was completely intriguing because it showed a time in radio when you could do basically what you want, and if you got canned from one place, you were at a next place a week afterwards. How was that era overall? Do you miss that type of radio?
I sure do. I think radio today, if you'll pardon me saying so, stinks.
What about it is so bad?
Well, the fact that it isn't like it used to be, where you had freewheelers talking on the air and chatting with you and talking directly to you, to the one person. They're not doing that anymore, and that's a major mistake they've made in radio.
Now, a lot of people say that you're a legend in this radio business and that you're a pioneer. Would you say that a part of you was sort of ahead of your time? Because you used the word broad, and it got you fired. And I find that ridiculous, but that was the 40s and that was the 50s. So is there a part of you that thinks maybe if you were in radio in the 80s, it would have been different? Or are you happy with what you did in this business?
Well, first of all, let me even tell you another word that was banned and you would get fired for. Pregnant.
Are you serious? The word pregnant would get you fired?
I am absolutely, yes, indeed. I know 2 men that I worked with who mentioned that their wives were pregnant and they got canned on the spot.
That doesn't make any sense because you're talking about your wife being pregnant. If you were slandering somebody back then or even talking about a famous person being pregnant, maybe I would get it for the times. But Art, that makes no sense that when you're saying, oh, my wife's pregnant or this or that it would get you fired. But I guess radio was really clean cut back then.
Oh, boy, was it. And I had this record turner, and first of all, can we go back to the beginning?
Yes. What's on your mind, Art?
Pardon?
What's on your mind? What's up, Art?
Okay, what I want to tell you is how I got started in the business. I came home from World War II, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And my mom told me she had seen an ad in the Daily Tribune. It would run every day. Be a radio announcer, make big money, and be a big star, that sort of thing. And Radio Institute at 165 North Michigan Avenue in Chicago. So she said, would you go in there? And I said, I sure will. I'll go in tomorrow morning. So I went in, and you had to take an audition, you know, a lot of baloney stuff. And then they also were paid by the GI Bill. And one of the people who founded the school many, many years later ended up in the slammer for misusing the funds that came in from the government for the schooling. But I went in there, and they had wonderful announcers teaching the classes. And I remember one was Paul Barnes. He called himself the man of 1,000 voices. I want to tell you what he did on the air every 5 nights a week. At 10 o'clock at night, he did a 15-minute show on WGN, Chicago's #1 station, and he played every single voice on the show, male and female. You don't hear that sort of stuff anymore, do you?
No, you don't. It seems like back then you were allowed to be more creative and innovative. You know what I mean?
Creative is the word, Ryan. That is the word, creative. And then when WCFL called me, I was doing commercials in Chicago when I came out of the Army in 1950. And the manager, Marty Hogan, of WCFL, 50,000-watt station, called me and asked me if he'd come in and take an audition, which I did. And he said, look, you're hired. He said, we'll pay you. Are you ready?
How much?
Are you ready? We'll pay you $120 a week.
Were you happy or were you sad that it wasn't that much money? Like, how much money was it back then?
Oh, no, that to me was a fortune. In the Army, I was making $48 a week for 3 years, 2 months, and 7 days. And, oh, boy, that was a fortune to make. And so he asked me what format I'd like to do. I said, I just want to sit and talk with the people and do things. And he said, would you do me a favor? Will you get me Chicago's best record turner? I actually said that to him. Will you get me Chicago's best record turner? He said, well, the best one works across the street at WBBM, CBS radio. But I don't know if James Caesar Petrillo, the head of the union, will allow him to work 2 jobs, you know. Well, he did. He allowed it. So I had Lenny Kaye as my record turner from the time I started the morning show on WCFL. And he was just like I was. He anticipated everything I wanted. He threw voice track after voice track. Oh, the one I still hear from some people when I MC things or meet older people here, there's no light in the men's room. And, oh, boy, I still hear that from people. There's no light in the men's room. And come in. I said, I'll give you an example. Mayor Daley's here with us today. Mayor Daley, of course, is a great man and the mayor of the city of Chicago. And, Mr. Mayor, did you like what you saw here? Anything wrong? And Lenny Kaye would throw in, there's no light in the men's room. I'd say, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that sort of thing with him. And we started doing that with all sorts of voices. And Lenny Kaye, the name he went by, Kratoska was his real name. Lenny Kaye would have 3 stacks. We had 3 turntables in those days, by the way, across from us, and we'd look at the glass at each other, you know. And we also had a union engineer, the NABET, the National Association of Broadcast Technicians, would be sitting in there running the controls for us, the volume and everything, you know. And so Lenny Kaye would have 3 stacks of records, and and he wore gloves. And as soon as I said something that could use a voice track, he would whip through those records, cue it up, and throw it at me.
What is your favorite memory in radio?
Well, my favorite memory, actually, is interviewing in his home President Truman.
What is that like? Because not a lot of people can say they got to interview President Truman. So for you, how surreal was that?
Okay, I'm covered with goosebumps telling you about it, and I really mean that. I was driving back from Branson, Missouri, and we had bought some land down there, my wife and I. And I was driving home alone, and I thought, I'm going to stop off and just see. First of all, I was going into the Truman Museum. So I went to that, and I noticed on his 1903 rifle that he had in World War II when he was in the Army.
Yeah.
And I noticed it on display without a blade, And so I had one exactly like that at home. So I thought, I'm going to go find his house. And I'm going to, if his wife or someone else comes to the door, I'm going to say that, hey, I've got a bayonet for your 1903 Springfield. I'd like to send it to you. I'll swap it to you for an autograph. He said, well, you like that. and he says to his wife, who is this guy? She says he's with ABC and some other stations in Chicago. And he said, does he have a recorder with him? And she said, he told me outside when he helped me with the groceries. That's how I got the house, helping her with the groceries from her car. And I said, she said, he has no recording equipment here. It's right out. It's in his car a block away. And that was true. And he said, well, come on and let's talk. And we talked for about 20 minutes to a half hour. And we talked about everything. And, he had to call for the bombs to be dropped during World War II. And I asked him about that. And he said, that is the most important thing that ever happened in the history of the world, in his opinion. He talked over with our highest generals and all, and General MacArthur, of course, who was over there in that period. And they all agreed that not only would it save millions of American lives, it would save many, many millions of other lives, too. So they went ahead and did, and of course that did end the war. And then we talked about a few other things and chatted, and I told him about the bayonet, of course, again, and I said, I'll send it to you for an autograph. And he said, autograph picture. He said, I don't have any here, but give me your home address. I'll send one to you. Well, I got home the next day, and 2 days after I got back home, the picture had arrived, and I had sent the bayonet for him, too. So, and I must tell you, though, as I left the house, he turned around and he said, Bess, Mr. Hellyer, watch that last step. He says, Bess, when are we going to get that upper step repaired? Just like any of us. Just like any of us, Ryan.
That's awesome. And here's what I want to ask you. A lot of times presidents and world leaders can be kind of cocky and sort of arrogant. What was President Truman like? I mean, he's known for ending World War II, so maybe he had a chip on his back. What was he like when you first met him? What was his vibe like?
Just a delightful, easygoing gentleman. Here, I'll tell you the end of the story, too.
What happened?
This will prove it to you. I left, and he was leaning on a cane when I left, and I walked about 3/4 of the block down the street and was getting into my car, and I just glanced back at the house. President Truman was waving to me.
It seems like being a president now or being a world leader, it doesn't require class. The vibe I'm getting from President Truman is it seems like he was a guy that you could get a cup of coffee with and talk about life. And it just seems like anybody that's running for any office position probably should look at what President Truman did and think about bringing a thing of class back to the offices. Would you agree with me, Art?
You said that beautifully. Oh, I have to tell you about another one. Ronald Reagan.
What was he like?
I interviewed him, and I asked him about the picture also, He said, yes, I will send you a picture of me and my wife. I'm looking at it on my wall here. You know who signed it?
Who signed it?
The dog sitting in the picture with him. It's got dog prints on it.
How awesome is it? There are radio hosts now that haven't even interviewed one president, and you got to interview what are regarded as some of the greatest presidents ever, Ronald Reagan and President Truman. How surreal is that, Art, to think that you were given two once-in-a-lifetime opportunities twice?
All right, I'm going to give you another one. I'm shaking hands with Richard Nixon in this picture up here as I conclude the interview at ABC in Chicago for the 5:30 news that night from New York. And he was a strange man. He came up with a lot of Secret Service around him, you know. And he said he had to go to the men's room first. And as he came out, the news director, Bud Fotopoulos, brought me a couple papers, and I was looking at them. And Nixon comes over and he said, "What are you looking at?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Those papers are about me, aren't they?" And I said, "Not necessarily." He said, "Are those questions you're going to answer me or ask me?" I said, "No, Mr. President. I ad-lib everything," and I gave the papers back and went on and ad-libbed it, and he stumbled all over the place.
Do you feel sort of offended when that happens, that the president doesn't have trust in the media, or do you sort of shake it off, Art, and just know that he was a completely insane narcissist?
No. I just can continue and go on with it and conclude it too a little later, you know.
He seems like he was a very odd person. I feel like anybody that wants to be a world leader has to have an ego. But Richard Nixon just seems like he was kind of a creepy person. Am I right about that?
Oh, you hit it right on the head. That's a very good word for it. That's a very good word for it, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Art. It's just he has this way that I've watched videos of him on YouTube. He just seems like he wasn't all there. It's like he had no confidence in himself, so he had to act really pompous to make himself feel good.
Oh, and he was exactly that pompous. Oh, and then I've got an autographed picture to my wife and me from John F. Kennedy, too. And the originals, of course, I keep in the bank vault, you know, with all these things. And I only traveled with him one time, and it was over to West Virginia, which, a funny thing is, where I started radio on WKNA on New Year's Day of 1947. I started in Charleston, West Virginia. At any rate, I traveled West Virginia with him, and it was very cold weather at the time.
Yeah.
And he was always in a suit every day, a blue suit or a brown suit. So I asked him one day, "Aren't you freezing to death?" I said, I'm wrapped, I'm swathed in this winter clothing. And he opened his shirt then, and he showed me why he didn't have to wear that real heavy outer clothing. He was wearing real thick woolen underwear.
He seems like a guy that you could hang out with. I feel like a lot of these presidents sometimes are kind of nerdy and aren't very cool, but John F. seems like he was a guy that would be fun to hang out with on the weekend, you know?
You know, you're a keen observer that these things, you really are. You're hitting it right on the head.
Radio's all I'm good at, Art. I never was good at sports. I wasn't the cool kid when I was younger. Radio's all I've been good at, so I've always made a conscious effort to be very observant.
Well, you're doing a great job on this, I'll tell you.
Thank you very much. Another thing I want to ask you is, when you were doing the morning madcap, was there a certain interview that kind of went the wrong way? Because when you were meeting the presidents, you were classy to them and you were being very nice. But when you were on air, you were kind of known as a guy that, well, as we say in 2016, would bust balls. So back then, were there any interviews that ever went kind of sideways?
I'm looking at Liberace, Jackie Gleason, Berlin.
Were there ever any famous people you met that were the worst type of human beings, where you just couldn't handle how much of an ego they were? They were all very nice to you. Maybe that's to show that you are very classy to them and they feel like they could trust you. And a lot of other people that were in your position, that were famous like you, would have been pompous, but maybe you took the approach of being laid back and then they felt comfortable.
That's a very, very good analysis. It really is, Ryan.
Thank you, Art.
You hit the nail right on the head. You really have.
Because I can kind of feel that right now when we're talking. You've done so much in radio. You're known as an innovator and a pioneer. I've had people that are huge in radio right now, and they come on my show, and they're not arrogant per se, but they act like they're just hot shit, as I'll say on my podcast. But for you, it's like you're so humble. It's very charming. I love it.
Well, thank you very much. Well, that goes back to what I said to you about 18 minutes ago, that back in that day, we would speak to one person. We would speak to Grandma in the living room or Mom and Dad in the kitchen having cups of coffee before they went to work, And it was strictly a one-on-one approach that we used.
Now, every person, when they get older, they like to rip on the younger people. People ripped on the baby boomers. People ripped on the kids in the 80s, the kids in the 90s. What I want to ask you, because you've seen everything in this lifetime, you've literally seen everything happen with computers, TVs, radio. What do you think of people in their 20s and late 20s? Because us, quote-unquote, millennials, we get a lot of hate. But is there a part of you that feels like if we give it time, we have potential? Or are things actually getting bad?
No, I don't think they're getting bad. It's just that as you go through time, changes occur, like in music and so on and so forth, the movies and all, and roll with that. Just roll with it.
What's the weirdest thing that you've seen throughout all your years being alive? What is the weirdest transition? Is it internet, mobile phones, fast cars, sex on TV being very prominent? What's the weirdest thing that you see even in 2016 and you can't get over?
Well, I often say if my mom and dad came back today, they wouldn't believe what's going on in the world. I mean, I've got a computer right here in front of me, and the computer is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I never would have guessed any time when I was growing up as a kid that we'd have something that we could carry in our pocket and order groceries or see what's playing at the local theater, see what the best restaurant menu is today, that sort of thing. It is the most remarkable thing, and it's been so wonderful, although I did lose my wife 18 years ago, and I called her the lovely Elaine on all my shows. I lost her to breast cancer, but there have been so many improvements medically, too, and they would not have been possible without computers.
How have major towns changed over the years? I mean, you add skyscrapers and you have more traffic, but for a major city like Chicago, how have things changed over the years?
Okay, I'll tell you. When I was doing news, this was especially the late night news, the last newscast every night on Channel 7, which is ABC TV in Chicago. I did that for 15, 16 years. And there were no shootings in it.
Do you think it's getting worse, or was there just not social media and cameras to cover it overall?
Well, you mentioned something there. Every newscast opens with those and continues with them for 17 minutes, at which time they go to the weather.
Do you think it's overexposure? Do you think if they would show it less, maybe it wouldn't happen as much?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I think the media is very much at fault concerning that sort of thing.
It just seems like it's all about getting the clicks on the websites and getting the views on the TV channels. And I just see this thing. I'm a very young person. I'm just 22. But within the last 10 years, since social media has become prominent, it's you have to break the news first. You got to do it. We have this world where it's ADHD. We're very hyper. And I think it's ruining modern, let's just say modern journalism as we speak. I feel like it's just a dying form and it's becoming a tabloid. And the whole thing of reporting the news is just kind of dying, Art. I will say that about 2016.
Well, I'm going to make a prediction. I've predicted other people who I heard on the air at outlying stations in Chicago or when we're driving somewhere away from Chicago. I would make a note of it and predict that they would one day be at a 50,000-watt station in one of the very, very big cities. And you certainly will if that's what you want to be, because you've hit every single thing head on the nail here in this conversation.
Well, to me, Art, the key to being in radio is you have to be very observant and you can't let your nerves get to you when you're talking. It's all about having confidence in what you're saying. You know what I mean?
Well,
Now, you got into radio in a very odd way. You just tried out via the magazine or the newspaper ad, and it said you're going to make a ton of money. Were you good at first, or did it take a bit of time before you were the good radio host at your craft?
Well, I started out at the school, the Radio Institute, and I was told that I was their top student of all time, you know, and I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that question.
What I want to ask you too is, how do you think your act? Because it was very wild and crazy, and that's just for saying the word broad and having crazy sound effects on the air. Back then, people were so outraged by it. But now with podcasts and apps and everything going on in 2016, if you were to take the morning madcap and have the 2016 version of it, do you think it would succeed, or was it sort of a thing for the 50s radio era?
Another amazingly good question, I might add.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. I do think it would go today, too.
I agree, too, because I think you would probably be more raw. I think you would swear a little more and you would be edgier, but you wouldn't be lowbrow or gross. I just think you would kind of be a little more shocking, maybe swear a bit, but it would come off very intellectual. It would never be gross.
It makes a lot of sense. I will tell you this. One time I took a long wire cable with a microphone on the end of it.
Yeah.
And I went down to the men's room on the 19th floor of the Furniture Mart where our studios were in Chicago. And what I did was tell Dr. K to keep the recorder going. And I recorded flushing the toilet. So I would use that as our time cue in the morning. At the time cue, the time will be 8 a.m. Enjoy your coffee. And then Lenny would flush the toilet off the...
Yeah, I saw that in your film that's on YouTube. People were so upset with you because they're like, oh, I'm trying to eat breakfast. Why are you doing this? Like,
and then I would tell them that's why I'm doing it, because I got you upset. That's why I did it.
Now, how would these complaints work? They didn't have social media where they can send a tweet and it goes to the boss immediately. No. Would people take the time to type on a typewriter, or would they try to call, let's say, CFL or WAIT? How would it work when there were complaints of people being offended? How would you guys find out?
Most of them would come in on the telephone. A few would be letters, but most of them would call immediately and just be hollering to talk to the station manager.
What's that like for you? Because in 2016, I find it ridiculous that these people on radio or TV, whatever, have to say they're sorry and they get fired over words. because these people take the time of day to be offended. What was your approach when you would do these wacky segments and then the boss comes in and goes, oh, this woman from Naperville is offended?
Oh, and I would say I would read all the letters on the air.
I think you were blessed in a time where, even though you got kicked off the air for doing things, I think you were allowed to be on longer because they would just sort of turn a blind eye. But I do think your act in 2016 would get national news because people are so uptight now. I think you would have to say you're sorry, you know?
No. But I got news for you. I still wouldn't say it. Back then, also,
awesome.
The next day I would be at another station, though. Back in those days, the next day after I got fired, I would be out at others. And believe it or not, Lenny Kaye would go along with me.
That's what I loved about watching your film on YouTube, too, was a lot of radio people, they get fired and you never hear from them again, or they're in a small market. That shows the true talent that you had and how much you meant to the media, was the fact that you would get kicked off CFL and then they're like, okay, let's put them on WAIT. It's fascinating to see that you were kind of the Howard of Chicago radio before Howard was even around.
Thank you. That's a compliment. Without having naked women in the studio with me, though.
What did you think of the shock jock era? It's kind of died down now because they're all getting older. But what did you think of the Dolls and Gary Meyer, Mancow, Howard, all the names that come to the radio listener's mind when you say the word shock jock? When you were out of radio and you were getting older, what was your take on these shock jocks in the 90s?
Well, first of all, I moved into television, and I spent 33 years at ABC TV in Chicago when we were the network announcers for ABC TV. They held an audition one time in New York at ABC New York, and each of the big city stations managers sent a recording of all of their announcers, and we had the best announcers and won the audition, and we did all the network stuff and did network news and everything under the sun. And it was just really terrific. And even then, every so often I'd get a call to do some radio shows. I'd do them and I'd work them in, you know. Have you read my book, The Hellyer Say?
I have not read it, but I do plan on getting it off of Barnes & Nobles because I find you very fascinating. I think radio needs someone like you again, and I hope to fill that void.
Well, thank you. And in it, the point I'm making is you can see how I worked this out. I was on 7 radio stations at a time and still working at Channel 7.
How would you balance that?
An awful lot of recording went on every week, naturally, you know.
What was your key to not burning out? When this is happening and you're just doing everything 24/7, how would you not burn out?
I honestly don't know how to answer that. I just, I had a very understanding wife and 5 children who were very cooperative and all with my strange hours, where sometimes I was working until 4:00 in the morning. How do you like that 4:01 in the morning?
What was it about 4:01 exactly?
What it was that the engineers, if I would run the newscast just before sign-off at 4:30 in the morning, and if I would run that just 1 minute over, they would get an hour's overtime.
Are you serious?
Yes, I am. I'm serious.
Wow. So they would always make sure that it would go till 4 then to save money, I'm assuming.
Oh, sure.
What is your take on how cheap radio can be? Do you find it disheartening, or does it make sense since there's so many fish in the pond known as radio?
Well, the radio I listen to now is I keep a sports station on, the number one.
Is it
Chicago
670 The Score?
Station. Pardon?
Do you listen to 670 The Score?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I grew up listening to. I love Terry Boers. He's one of my influences for radio, even though I'm not in sports radio.
Yeah. No, I leave that on all night on 1850 or so, a real old little portable radio I have. And I also have a team in a rotisserie league, baseball league. My son Michael founded it in 1985. It's one of the oldest ones in America. And so I play rotisserie baseball, and I have a team of 24 players and everything, major leaguers. So I listen to who got what during the night, who hit a home run, who stole a base, all the pitchers, that sort of thing,
So would you say that you're a pretty big sports fan, Art?
Yes, I am. I'm a Chicago Blackhawk and Chicago White Sox and Chicago Cubs and the Bears and all, and the Bulls. But I also love to watch Notre Dame and Southern California and teams like that too. I just enjoy sports. Yes.
What is your favorite memory of the sports scene in Chicago? Was it Ernie Banks, Michael Jordan, the '85 Bears, or maybe something even prior to that? What is your favorite memory of all these years?
It was December 8th, 1940. I was sitting at home, a teenager, doing my homework for York Community High School, and I was listening to the Bears play the Washington Redskins when on the second play from scrimmage, Bill Osmanski took the ball from the quarterback, went through right guard, took off, and ran 64 yards for the first touchdown for the Bears. And the final score, by the way, was 73-0 for the Bears, the highest score ever in the history of the National Football League. Many people today aren't even aware of that when they're talking football, that is my favorite memory.
Now, what was it about it that drew you in? How crazy was the game? Like, did it just begin from the beginning where they were just scoring points left and right?
Yeah, and there was no TV then. Jack Brickhouse was doing the game, and he was calling it on WGN radio, And I don't know. Again, you sort of have me there.
What about sports in 2016? Would you say that it's been more soft and that it's not as hard as it was back then where players wouldn't wear masks and helmets?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say about that just within the last few hours of this interview, the Cavaliers finally won a title for Cleveland. And that, to me, is a very, very, very exciting thing that happened in sports and should be played up big time. And, so forth.
Now, before I let you go, Art, out of everything you've done in radio and everything you've done just being someone in the media overall, what is your one favorite memory that will always make you smile?
I think it might have been when Elaine came in to have dinner with me and Nat King Cole. And Nat King Cole was appearing at this nightclub. And he asked me, please, to bring my wife in and be his guest. And we watched him. And we went into his dressing room, and it was smoke-filled. And I've always campaigned on the air for two things. One has been safety belts I have campaigned for since 1948 in the car. And the other thing is to get cigarettes out of people's mouths. And so let's see, where was I on that, come to think of it?
What was your favorite memory of being in radio or just media?
And it was, and the fact that a few nights later he died at age 45, and it was lung cancer caused by smoking those cigarettes.
Now, when did you first begin the anti-campaign of smoking?
Oh, back in the early 50s. Back in the early 50s and 48 for safety belts in cars. Oh, and the National Safety Council got a cease and desist order telling, and a court told me I couldn't talk about safety belts on the air.
How offensive is that they're saying you can't talk about things that save lives?
Yeah, well, you do it if you're going to get in trouble. But and by the way, I did keep on doing it.
Now, what is your advice? I know radio is completely different in 2016, but for kids like me and everybody else that wants to go into radio, what is some advice that a legend like you can leave us with?
Don't ever go into it.
That is about what half of the interviews I've had on the show have said. It's half disheartening, but then it motivates you because you want to beat the odds, you know?
Very good, yeah.
Well, Art, I think I want to have you on again to get your take on the news because you're a very brilliant person and you're very humble, yet I can tell you're very proud of what you've done. So I've had a lot of fun having you on my show.
Thank you, and this has been a real nice interview. I've enjoyed it ever so much, Ryan.
Sounds good, and I will be sure to have this on social media within the next half an hour so your friends, your family, and any of your fans can check it out.
Okay, within the next half hour it'll be on then.
Sounds good. Thank you for coming on, Art.
On that link you gave me.
Sounds good. I will send you the link via the Facebook chat. I appreciate you coming on Hoppe Hour.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this thoroughly, Ryan. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And that was radio legend Art Hellyer, who you often think about Dahl, Larry Lujak, Dick Clark, Howard, and a bunch of the other radio guys in this business. But Art Hellyer is a pioneer and a legend who changed the game forever. Now, if you're a fan of Art or you like this interview and you want to hear more of my show, it's not hard. All you have to do is go to the Google Play and iPhone shop with the smartphones, search up Hoppe Radio, HOPPE Radio, and you can listen anywhere in the world. Go to my website, RyanHoppeRadio.com. If you're on social media, tweet at me at RyanHoppeRadio, Snapchat me, Hoppe Radio, and go to my Facebook, Hoppe Hour. Just search it up. Once again, thank you to Art for coming on Hoppe Hour, and it was an absolute honor. I am your host, Ryan Hoppe, saying peace out.
Hoppe Hour. Hoppe Hour.